me introduce to you Mr. John Deiqteireos. 30 years of coverage, Washington, New York, Los Angeles, Rome, London, and Abu Dhabi. He covered geopolitics, trade, energy, economic development, and globalization, which he will be talking about today. He covered the fall of Berlin Wall, the World Trade Center bombing, Iraq War, the G7 and G20 summits, creation of WTO, China's National People's Congress, and so on. He's an engaged speaker with the World Economic Forum, OPEC Seminar, the IMF Roundtable, St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, UAE World Government Summit, Islamic Development Bank Annual Meeting, and Future Investment Initiative. So you can see why I was panicking 2 years ago. Please join me in welcome Mr. John Deiqteireos.
Thanks. Gato, thanks very much. There's no reason to ever panic with me, though. So the only thing I haven't added to this list is the literary salon. So I have to put that in for the future because I'm very dedicated to it, as Ms. Asma knows. Ms. Asma calls me Mr. John, so I have to say Ms. Asma just out of respect, right? So that's my bio. And Asma approached me to say, in the sense of the third culture, what would be worth us talking about for the next generation of workers and the trends that we see today. So 2 years ago, we talked about the Silk Road, and you saw what happened in Gaza and its development on the Belt and Road Initiative. There's two themes that came out of my resume. One was that I covered the creation of the World Trade Organization in the early 90s and actually physically launched in 1995. And I just spoke to a group of NYU students, and it surprised me that we talk about globalization, but nobody really understands what globalization is and what it's doing. So our conversation with our special guest I'm going to introduce in 2 minutes is the link between globalization and digital disruption and the change it's going to bring to the third culture, but very much the change to the baby boomers at the same time, right? So it's important. So it describes the way countries and people of the world interact and integrate, and many things have become globalized as people come into contact with each other. And then the economic globalization is something I've watched. People wonder about the rise of China since the creation of the WTO. China was a $360 billion economy in 1990. $360 billion. It's a $14 trillion economy in 2018. It's the most rapid development of economy in any time in history, right? The expansion of the economy itself. To give it context, the US is a $20 trillion economy now. So over the next 3 or 4 years, China is going to surpass the United States as the largest economy in the world. Hence the reason Donald Trump is very worried about the rise of China, right? And because of the population size. India has had very good growth. It will accelerate its growth now because it's woken up to the fact of China's rise and it should be growing faster. India is growing 7 to 8% a year, but it was very slow in the reforms over the last 20 years. So it went from $326 billion of an economy in terms of GDP to $2.7 trillion today. So India has the same population size as China, but it's $2.7 trillion versus China at $14 trillion. So you can, again, get the context of the rise of China. That's the explanation of globalization. I talked about covering the creation of the WTO, but what accelerated globalization is something that people rarely talk about, and that was this Uruguay round of trade between 1986 and 1994, which had 123 countries and then led to the World Trade Organization. You all heard the World Trade Organization, I'm sure. They tried to go to the next level because we've had so much globalization, there was resistance to the Doha round. Doha tried to launch the round in Qatar. They tried for 5-6 years to push it down the road, and it stopped because there's a resistance to globalization. And we're living with this framework that was finished in 1994 and 1995. Now here's the link that I wanted to talk to you about, the link between globalization and technology. And this is from Professor Richard Baldwin. It's very prescient, and it leads us to our guest beautifully. Old-style globalization worked on a calendar that ticked year by year, whereas the new current wave of globalization is being driven by information technology, or IT, which is changing and disrupting economies and societies with increasing rapidity. So what we saw was the fall of communism, the advent of the World Trade Agreements, the introduction of digital technology, and the same thing that the professor is talking about now, this convergent, which is moving globalization at a much rapid pace. So what does it mean for the third culture is what we're going to talk about in terms of, in this session, about jobs and embracing the future of technology, right? Because there's a lot of change happening all at the same time. It's affecting the baby boomers like me, and it's impacting the third culture and the millennials as we speak. Good time to introduce our guest. I'm thrilled to have him because we need two different generations. Saeed Al-Qarqawi is the director of the Dubai Future Academy, now CEO of the group. Emirati scientist specialized in the future of sciences. Worked on the Mars project, which is a absolute game changer for Dubai and the UAE overall for 2117. Worked as a researcher at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center before that, and as a graduate of Eastern Michigan University. Let's give a warm Salon welcome to Saeed Al-Qarqawi.
Join me to welcome Mr. Saeed Al-Qarqawi. Please.
You know what? I think be able to see the screen, it's not a bad idea. You want to grab a microphone?
Yeah, I will give him the microphone.
Because I have some data. What's that?
No, I'm leaving the floor for both of you.
Okay, and you'll take the questions at the end.
I will take the questions and
Thank
answer
you for
after.
that.
I will be the moderator for the question and answer. But now, with two giants, I'd rather get out of here.
Two giants from different generations, but I appreciate that.
I don't know about giants.
Okay,
but sure.
good. So, we have about 7 or 8 slides. I don't want to overwhelm you with data, but the reason I reached out to Saeed and to His Excellency Omar Al-Alama, who runs Dubai Future Foundations and is the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, is because the change is happening so fast. I think it's better to hear from two different generations, right? So here are the early opinions of artificial intelligence, okay? We all know what artificial intelligence is. It's this creation of new technology linked to the digital revolution. Before, Saeed, why don't you give us your 30 seconds on how you see what is artificial intelligence in your view, because a lot of people don't understand it.
Artificial intelligence. All right. So artificial intelligence is basically the collection of data that it is now, as humans, just putting it in a larger perspective, as humans have collected a lot of information, and as technology has, there's a group here. Hi. As technology is advancing, so we're seeing the performance output of computers becoming much more stronger, much more capable. So what we're seeing is there is an increase of, if you can say, like food, and we've created a baby, so to speak, which is computers and performances. And what's interesting is now these two pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and this is what AI to some extent is. Now AI is something massive. It has smaller aspects, such as things are called machine learning, which is, as the name sounds, it is teaching a machine how to learn a specific task. So for example, today, all of us have artificial intelligence in our phone, whether it was Siri, Alexa, Bixby, if you're using Samsung. This is a form of artificial intelligence. However, artificial intelligence has two main distinctions. So whenever we think of artificial intelligence in the movies, everybody thinks of Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then chaos happening. That is a form of artificial intelligence called general AI. It is artificial intelligence that has general capacity to do many different things. And that ultimately is the goal of many of the different, not the Terminator part, but an AI that can do many different things. However, what we have today is something called narrow AI. It has a narrow task. You're telling it to move from here to there, and it will perfect that motion. So whenever we see robots in factories that are picking up objects and putting them somewhere, they have a factor of artificial intelligence in them, which is called machine learning. And then to some extent, that sums up the one over the 30 seconds, but that is
no, it's
AI
fine. That's why I think it needs an explanation, because we often talk about artificial intelligence. So this is how the world is seeing artificial intelligence, and we have the benefit of Mr. Qarqawi to drill into some of the slides and information that we find. And we did the research this week, so it's as up to date as it comes, right? So 41% of the consumers believe artificial intelligence will improve their lives in some way, which I think is interesting, because that means the millennials are kind of engaging more than anyone else. AI technology can enhance business productivity, almost every business person you speak to are embracing AI because it does increase productivity. The real question mark, and as you'll see later, is what does it do for jobs in the future? By producing better productivity by up to 40%. AI could double economic growth rates by 2035. It's quite interesting as a concept because we're seeing slow growth in Europe, decent growth in America, but the real growth is from the Middle East to India to China and Southeast Asia today, right? So this will even out the growth rates because of technology. 84% of global business organizations believe that AI will give them a competitive advantage. Before I go to the next slide, give us why Dubai in particular, and the UAE in general, is embracing artificial intelligence as opposed to fearing it, Saeed. What would you say?
So there are different reasons and aspects as to why. First, no one is looking at it from a governance slash government perspective. All discussions, all development, all whether it was theoretical and applied is happening at the private sector. Those in Silicon Valley and gradually in Shenzhen and in China. And no government has taken an approach to look at the governance and ethical aspects of AI. At the end of the day, private sector is just in it to make a buck. And so when we look at one of the reasons why is because it's an opportunity to try to contribute to the dialogue of AI and where is it being implemented and impacted around the world.
Is there a danger? Is there a danger? Sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all.
I did an interview with Minister Qarqawi and the Minister of the Future. I think it's your father, am I right?
Relative.
Relative,
Yeah,
okay, good, because you have the similar facial features. At the World Government Summit, we did an interview with him on CNN, and he had said to me, we have 7 billion consumers in the world, and as you suggested, the private sector is moving forward, but the governments aren't waking up. So is it time for the governments to keep pace with the private sector, partially to regulate it, but partially to get the better services to the people?
Yeah. So what we're noticing is this is a wave that's happening whether we want it or not. And what's going to happen in, excuse me, in many parts of the world is that AI will come in, there will be lots of resistance, and then many different governments will be forced to adapt to it rather than trying to adapt it to their needs. And this is what the UAE is trying to do. It's trying to lead the conversation when it comes to AI and its governance around government services, around the framework in which the private sector can even sandbox and lead in and run with it. Because ultimately what's happening is whether we look at, for example, Uber had the service where, or had a program where even if you deleted Uber from your phone, it can still track you. This is a program and it can still track your location. And even if you use one of its competitors, Lyft, for example, it tells Uber, by the way, it's using Lyft. So again, and government in the US had no legislation for it. So that's one aspect. Another is when we talk about data privacy. So even from as a government and trying to ensure the safety of the citizenry, data privacy is another aspect. So when we even talk about our own, or even a larger chunk of the world, many different governments don't have an opinion regarding AI. Traditionally, it's been, oh, the US has done it, we'll follow suit.
Well, this is very interesting what you say, because when it comes to Facebook and Google, for example, you would argue that government is really behind the curve of what Google and Facebook and Uber have done with data. So the European Union's waking up, but there's a danger of not managing the big Goliaths, right?
No, absolutely. Or even trying to have, so it's not just waking up on time, but even having the framework. So even you're up, you need to put your clothes on.
Yes.
Yeah. So the framework for government or for even the private sector, specifically when we talk about data ethics and AI ethics, it is still a conversation that is happening to this day because no one has a clear sort of decision as to, all right, with AI, we're going to focus on X. each country is doing its own thing. So when we look at China, they're trying it with the social credit program, where they're using AI for that aspect. We're seeing Russia is using it primarily for the defense sector, and we're seeing the US is handing it over to the private sector and working more on a public partnership model with the private sector, because they're forced to, as a result of the private sector leading many of its development.
Okay, very good. Automation in jobs. I said to Saeed, and I wanted to put this is pretty radical numbers, and I shared a report with him from the OECD. So it's very timely we did this now. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development out of Paris, which represents 35 countries around the world, the most developed economies in the world, just put out a report on Thursday, and I can get to those details in a second. But the potential for job automation by the mid-2030s, how many jobs will be eliminated from the system by 2030? In the United States, of current jobs, 38% of the jobs will be automated. It's unbelievable, 1 out of 3, right? Germany, about the same number. The UK, about the same number. Japan, because of its large manufacturing base, about 24%. Pretty shocking number, right? So what are the future skills? And one of the things Asma challenged me to do with Mr. Al-Qarqawi was to say, what are the future jobs for the next generation, right? So the mindset has to change, and I would love to get Saeed on this. Mental elasticity, critical thinking, creativity, people skills, science, technology, engineering, and math, STEMs, and a new category that most people haven't seen, social media, mobile, analytics, and cloud, which is SMAC, and the interdisciplinary knowledge to bundle all these 5 disciplines together, right? The question is, and it's not just a UAE-facing question, are schools keeping pace with the change that we see from artificial intelligence? In the UK, my daughters are getting a great education now after being here for 7 years, great education here, but is it keeping pace with this is the big question.
So this is what's interesting, and we've experimented with an aspect by accident when it comes to this last year at the Academy, where we ran a program, a summer program for students from the ages of 12 to 22. And what we did was we wanted to focus on critical thinking, the 3 C's, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, as well as collaboration. And what we did was we brought in 3D printing as that medium, that technology is a tool and we get to use it based on our needs, and that we gave them a challenge. You have 1 week to try to solve something using 3D printing. And we even sent them to certain areas within our ecosystem and having them look at the different challenges, design it, and then print it and pitch it to a judge. And what we noticed was, so we had 2 groups from 12 to 17, and then from 17 to 12 to 16, and 17 to 22. What we noticed that these skills were embedded in those from 13 to 16, and they were almost gone from 17 to 22.
Wow, in that age gap.
In that age gap. So
is that a worry then in terms of?
And we found it by accident, where it's 51 students, but they span 22 different educational institutions, public and private. So we came up with more questions. What happened? Something must have happened there that just linked, that broke off. Is this something that is continuing on? So we're seeing that at least partially the educational system is trying its best to keep up. And that's why, at least in the UAE, there is a focus on future skills, and that's a whole portfolio that was given to His Excellency Ahmed Bilhol, where they validated a lot of these aspects. So there is a report by the World Economic Forum that looked at skills of the future back in the early 2000s, and they released one with the future skills team, and it validated the first 4 top skills that are sort of needed in the future were the same here: complex problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity.
Now, I noticed that some schools, for example, in the UK, for example, my kids are going to a Wimbledon girls' school, and they give them the option to drop maths when they're 16, not take maths to A levels. That seems like a dramatic error if you're looking at what's needed today. You agree with what I'm saying?
Yeah, and what's interesting is if you look at the format of education or of the classroom has not changed over the past century and a half. And what we're seeing is that there is a huge push to change that. We are taught, for example, the example of maths. I was personally taught maths because it was important. I didn't get why we should do it. It wasn't until I was in university and trying to explore different career paths that its value came up. And that is what's missing. And what we're seeing even when we ask students, they're like, yeah, I want to go into, we talked to a student who is 14 years old. He's like, yeah, I want to be a data scientist. Okay, sure. We expected like astronaut, something that would sound cool. And the reason for it is they mentioned that when they looked at as a student at the different things they can solve, just as a challenge, as kids would do, that it was more than the rest of the field, so you want to focus on this.
Oh.
And there was this element of, I can solve different aspects and it's going to be fun. On the same topic as well, we're seeing more champions for these fields. So whether it was Elon Musk or different scientists just being on TV, it's having that ripple effect as well on students.
Well, it's funny you should say that, right? So we have him. You didn't even know that. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring voices from 3 different categories, the names you know from this business, right? And technology, the inventors, the people who are cutting edge today and even yesterday. So he brings up an interesting point, and I'm glad you brought it up. It was a natural transition. There's a pretty good chance we will end up with universal basic income or something like that due to automation. So universal basic income, I'm not sure if you know the concept, but that's the government gives you a paycheck every month, whether you're working or not. In the United States, they're talking about maybe $1,500 a month as a basic fee, because of my previous slide saying about 1 out of 3 jobs will be gone by the time of 2030. I find this interesting on 2 fronts. Number one, that the government can't afford this in America with $15 trillion of debt. The same burden in Europe, right, today because of the aging populations. The affordability, who's supposed to pay for the universal basic income? And number 2, I find it very odd, and you'll see this with Facebook as well, that it's the technology leaders are saying we're eliminating the jobs because of innovation, artificial intelligence, changing and adapting your workforce, but it's the government that's supposed to pick up the bill. Now that's impossible, isn't it? Saeed? Tell me what you guys are thinking at the government-wide level here in the UAE.
So what we don't have that the US has is it has the Silicon Valley as that force that is pioneering and charging forth with whatever they want, essentially. On the other hand, here it's more of a collaborative approach. It's a symbiotic relationship, even with the private sector, where the private sector will look at government with what it's trying to do. So an example would be when Uber first came to the UAE, they came to the Dubai Future Accelerator because they knew that the regulator will not allow them, and that the regulator has this say. And if you cannot work around the regulator like they've done in different countries, that you had to go through them for anything. And so what happened was they came to the Dubai Future Accelerator within the Dubai Future Foundation, and they worked for 9 weeks on a pilot program, which ended up being sort of the framework. And it was the first instance that Uber worked with the government. And then they took that as a model for
other countries in the region.
Yeah, and other countries in the region and even elsewhere.
Okay. This is an interesting letter that I was having this conversation with His Excellency Omar Allama, who Saeed works with, and this need to embrace the future, and that's why I suggested somebody from the Dubai Future Foundation today. So this was a letter in the Gulf News that just appeared a week ago. It's extraordinary in the language, and I'll read a little bit of it, not the whole thing. It's from Aisha to Yuji, who's in grade 10 at the Shuifat school here in Abu Dhabi. So she praises Elon Musk, saying, I am Aisha, a high school sophomore. I'm not exactly sure how to say this, but you cannot possibly imagine what a huge fan of yours I am. She's saying that to Elon Musk, right, in the letter. You are a mark of a true entrepreneur. Your innovative genius enables us to look towards unforeseen horizons and embark on uncharted journeys. So she gives him a nice compliment. Later in the letter, though, she says, this paranoia you have about artificial intelligence is not good. I'm quoting her again. Most recently, I have been captivated by the field of AI. This is in part due to your widely publicized pessimism towards artificial intelligence, and in part due to my hobby of robotics, year 10, pretty impressive, right? I could not disagree more with your fears about artificial intelligence. I believe it will be a democratizing effect on personal finance. It'll improve healthcare, or revolutionize our educational systems. Yes, AI may have dangers that must be considered, but I believe it is too early to start placing regulations and restrictions on something we ourselves have not entirely understood. That's interesting, isn't it? So she's saying, let's not kill off artificial intelligence because it has potential. Elon Musk is an entrepreneur and creator, but he's worried about the next generation if we don't deal with it.
And this even to your previous point on your daughter's schools allowing them to drop math. We're seeing that even the rate of
the school tried to, but we suggested to our daughters, not a good idea, right?
It's
because
giving you the option.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is even students are absorbing that information elsewhere, whether it was through having idols like Elon or just the fact that they're on the internet. And what's interesting is we don't yet understand AI. However, what's interesting is we're seeing many different endeavors already happening as a result of us not understanding. Whether it was going back to Elon Musk and starting OpenAI, that publicly Elon mentioned that its goal is to have a mind-to-machine interface, and that's its goal. And that initiative that he's pumping, I think $40 million a year, has already created an AI that beats the best video game players in the world twice. So they did that last summer, and they did it again this year after the team has trained, and then they brought them back in, did it, I think, last month, and they lost again.
Wow.
And this game is unlike Go, for example, with Google. This game has a lot of intuition, has a lot of fact aspects that we would consider as human, but this machine was able to do it because it was learning from different players and different machines as well.
So it's taking the best of the human players, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's go next slide. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. Now it's our time to define a new social contract for our generation. We should explore ideas like universal basic income to give everyone the cushion to try new things. 2.4 billion users out of 7 billion people in the world. That strikes just a sense of arrogance to me.
So, and that's
Can
where
you hold the mic a little bit closer?
that's where Mark and Elon actually disagree, where there was this whole backlash between them, and they had this whole Twitter fight on, and them not being. So Elon Musk is disagreeing with Mark because he's telling you're not understanding AI yet you're developing it and you're investing billions in different startups that are leading AI technologies and AI solutions. And then the vice versa, saying, no, Mark is saying, we need to just invest and see what happens.
But the common thing is they both talk about a universal basic income, which is a huge challenge for a government to take on. We were a little bit tight on time, but let's make sure. Richard Branson sees it the same way. A lot of new, exciting innovations are going to be created, a chance to create a lot of wealth, but there is a real danger it could also reduce the amount of jobs. This will make experimenting with ideas like basic income even more important in the years to come. Now, we have a little clip here from Laurie Segal, who's a correspondent for CNN and technology, and she's talking to Tim Cook of Apple. And you have to listen carefully to what Tim Cook has to say about the next generation of man versus machines. Yeah, just a sec.
machine. You believe that we as human beings, we can control.
I absolutely do. I don't subscribe to the machines taking over the world. And I don't worry about that. I worry much more about people thinking like machines than machines thinking like people.
That's interesting. What do you mean?
I mean, forgetting the humanity in things. Forgetting that all of our products should be infused with humanity.
I get the sense that that feels very personal to you, what you just said.
It does.
Why?
Because it's the reason I'm on the face of the earth. That makes it really personal.
Good. So it's pretty profound. What did you think? He's worried that man or woman acts like a machine, that they stop thinking? What are your thoughts on what Tim Cook had to say, Said?
So I think I completely agree with him, and specifically in the sense that we're seeing different, specifically from a social changes, social aspect, where as technology is becoming more embedded in our belongings as humans, where instead of where we're seeing people who feel more of a belonging, and that they belong to more of a virtual world, or let's say a gaming community versus their actual family. And what we're seeing is the need to embed our values to these solutions. That instead of these solutions are
Overwhelming us.
exactly overwhelming us, we are taking a part in contributing to it having the soul of humanity as it goes forward.
Very interesting. A challenging question for you then. If we're seeing this job replacement in automation, by the way, I'm not a doomsayer, because everybody said it during the digital revolution, we'd be wiping out jobs in media, and I think we've created 4 times more jobs because of the digital revolution than we've lost, right? They're different jobs. So they're website jobs, many more digital writers, many more creative ads for your phones and for digital platforms along with TV. But do you feel that we should slow the train down, or the train's going to leave the station and we got to make sure it has what we want on that train? There's 2 different approaches, right?
So what I'm seeing personally is that the train is heading up to space. It's not even stopping. We cannot stop it anymore, for variety of reasons. One is, as you mentioned, that this conversation we're having at the risk and automation has been happening for, depending on who you ask, 150 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And we had many people who resisted that, and they were gone. However, what we're noticing is that the rate of change is increasing. And that is the worrying factor. So we know now that we cannot stop this train, but we know that we can, to some extent, be able to tell what this train needs as it goes forward. To some extent, we can tell, all right, there are jobs today that are immune to this train, and surprisingly enough, it is as close as, so the job that is purely immune is nursing, and then all the way you have law, and we're already seeing financial analysts. Their jobs are being replaced by AI tools that are writing the reports for financial reporters. And it is ultimately the human aspect. We know for sure that the human element is needed. It's just how, one, we translate that aspect to the machine. So jobs like human translators that are there to translate human emotions to AI currently exist and will increase as AI requires more data points regarding that. An example is how Nissan is using emojis for its ads based on its different models. And they've created the whole ad earlier this year based on this. So they're trying to estimate and trying to quantify human emotion in this regard. Another thing, the reason why this train is not stopping is because the solutions outweigh currently outweigh the negative impacts or negative aspects. We're seeing solutions such as the ability to map human minds and the ability to, as a result of AI, be able to sequence the human genome and understand more in this aspect.
Healthcare is going to be a revolution. I mean, I'm thinking, and this is through the help of the Dubai Future Foundation, showing me these different things, but the ability to scan yourself and your blood regularly without having to visit the doctor and get more regular updates of how your engine is working is what, 3-4 years away, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. Part of it is already here. It's different aspects. So this year in the World Government Summit, we've experimented with the idea of humans 2.0, and we did it in different segments.
Human 2.0. Do you want to explain that?
Now you are human 1.0. What is the next software update for humanity? And we tried to explore this idea with governments. So we divided it into 4 segments where each segment is 20 years ahead of the other. So you go in, we're talking about human physical body augmentation. We're seeing it to some extent today. Dubai Health Authority 3D printed a limb for, I think, 600 or so dirhams.
Unbelievable.
And that person's still here. They're even 3D printing how a person's body parts look like to explain cancer to patients. And it's customized and personalized. So we experimented with the idea of humans having the ability to augment different aspects, which science fiction has done quite well. But we based it off of different developments we're seeing today.
Wow.
And then applying how healthcare did that.
Good.
And
just one more slide when you're ready.
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is a final slide, and then we can take some questions, I hope. Yeah? Perfect. Now, this was a story that I covered 2 weeks ago. And because as an emerging markets editor, my territory is basically Middle East to China, Middle East to Southeast Asia, Middle East to Africa. If there's a major story. This one caught a lot of attention. It's Jack Ma, the chairman of Alibaba Group, right? So we're hearing from the different leaders. The real 996 is not simply overtime work. I personally think that 996 is a huge blessing, how to achieve the success you want without paying extra effort and time. So let me explain 996 in 15 seconds. I said it was, when I tweeted it out, I said it's like a cult, 666. 996 is working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. That's the standard in China. That's the average work week in China. So Jack Ma was saying, we should be proud going from $380 billion as an economy in 1990 to $14 trillion because we got there doing the 996. So it's revolutionary for somebody from a communist state still, right? Social communist has grown to be very diversified as an economy. But to say, if you want to succeed in life, and this is his point, you have to have embedded in you the 996. His competitors spoke up on behalf of him as well. And then the government put an op-ed piece saying, look, you know, these technology pioneers of China are not the message from the government. It's the message from the Silicon Valley, as you were saying, of China. What I thought technology is going to make our life easier. We can work less, let the robotics do more. Jack Ma is saying, don't let technology, even Tim Cook was saying the same, don't let technology take over the man. The man and woman have to hold their position. What are your thoughts?
So I think for a fraction of the population that's working on these technologies, this is their reality, and this is what they need to look forward to. But for the rest of us, you know, you're sitting at home, you can order whatever you want. Life for the masses, to some extent, in developing or in developed economies, is they have more time to some extent, where you can sit and you can order anything you want, from food to groceries to even Jack Ma is doing it for Chinese societies where you have applications like WeChat, where you don't even need to leave the applications. Oh, I don't like Uber Eats, I'll go to Talabat, for example. No, you have all of these in one. So for the masses, to some extent, some may argue that the masses that are using their applications, their solutions, are having more time, more free time to do whatever they need to do.
But the guys inventing them, the men and women,
so those who are wanting to become software engineers and data scientists are looking forward to
the 996.
996, yeah.
Good. How old are you, Saeed?
26.
26. 26?
26.
Unbelievable. So, this is why I feel very good about the future, because I was watching the previous panel with Sheikha and thinking about what this new generation is talking about, right? It's great, because they're embracing the future. And when I sit with Minister Al-Alama, who's the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, who's 30 now, I think 31, and you have Saeed, who's the CEO of the Dubai Future Academy, I feel very comfortable about the future in the UAE because you've embraced it, which is great. Do you feel like it's a rocket ship that you guys are trying to ride, or is it reasonable?
I think it's more we're on a ship and trying to have it not go overboard.
Right.
So yeah.
So
There's a lot of pressure from the leadership here. Ultimately, is you guys are, you want to talk about the future. It is your future to run. And whatever happens, it is the responsibility of this upcoming generation to do it. So whether we succeed or not, it's our responsibility. So there is this impact, or there is this aspect of us. We can rely on ourselves to create the changes we want, and we know whatever ends up happening, if we succeed, it's because of our efforts as the youth, and if we don't, it's because of our effort as youth.
So they're putting the responsibility on your shoulders, that's what you're saying. Let's first before we take questions, a nice round of applause for Saeed Al-Qarqawi. Excellent, yeah, really. I knew this would work out because we needed two generations to look at what's going on, and you were absolutely superb. Do you want to? Of course. Yeah, that's what I said before we take the question.
It's a fascinating session, and of course, again, like last session, I don't want to take advantage, but talking about the human 2.0 or 02 or something. 2.0 sounds to me like X-Files, but we'll come to that.
I'm the last generation of presenters, so they're all going to be
robots. This is what I'm saying. I mean, it's still scary when we know that right now, as we speak, we have a profound percentage of unemployment worldwide. And here we go, we are heading in a trend where more unemployment will be created, leave alone the whole moral and ethical aspect of the debate around the AI is how our life will look like. I think those who have the fortune, who can say we will do more interesting things, easy for them to say. The question will be for all of us at the average level who will end up jobless, and even with a government having the basic salary or basic paycheck policy in place, it will degrade our lifestyle to a basic level where we all look alike. So anyway, it's a global change I guess we are looking at, but let's take questions.
Thank you. My name is Tidal. I have a question for both of you, for the audience. Being involved in the internet and the internet cycles, which has been started in early 70s for only Ministry of Defense in USA, and has been developed due to the certain researchers which they paid their lives to enhance the world, indeed, to serve the globe. In 1999, we have developed and created the new global summit to create the new generation internet called the IPv6. The version 6 should replace the IPv4, and the IPv4 has been ended 2011. However, within the last 22 years or 28 years, we were suffering really of having certain global agreement about deployment of the IPv6, where to enhance the global services in internet. The summit reached a level that it will take each country individually, but it could not solve the problem because legalization and a global agreement about the what you call the protection of the human being. Now the internet reached between two protocols where most of the countries are facing the real problem of the internet rather than enhancing. But certain countries, yes, they are using the benefits, but the benefits is really partial of the internet.
Okay, so because of time, what's the question?
The question is, when we put all services in hand of internet, which is not stabilized yet globally and agreed in all countries, and there is no law to protect the human being, this is where the danger is, where we put all the e-governments in the hands of an stable internet. It works between both protocols, where most of the applications are really hacking the user interest and user personality. This is where the danger is.
Okay, very good. So let's get Saeed's view on it, and I'll share my thoughts on it as well. There's kind of the danger to economic growth at the same time and the opportunity. How do you bridge this gap? Because there's a whole swath of the world. In Africa, they leapfrogged in mobile phones, but clearly not in artificial intelligence yet. Same thing in Latin America. Is there a mechanism for global governance, which is failing today? The World Trade Organization is too slow, the United Nations too clunky, intellectual property right organizations perhaps not up to speed, as you're saying. What do you do about this gap that's getting wider, as many people know, Saeed?
So I would say I'm no expert on internet and data privacy, but what we're seeing on a global scale, or the closest thing we've seen as an agreement, is the Thailand Accord, where we've seen at least 190 countries agreeing at least on data privacy. So when we talk about e-governments and e-services, the issue is the potential for governments and the savings. Now, when you look at all of it, ultimately it's all, in my opinion, it's purely economics. Is the reason why services are going online, and we're having e-services and mobile services and things like that, is the savings that these governments can have. Now, in terms of having or what would be more plausible in my experience is that each part of the world will end up creating its own say in terms of how it governs its version of the internet.
Well, how long will that take, you think? That's an interesting point.
So, again, it depends on who you're asking. So China already has that. And what we're going to see is, and it's to some extent already happening, where, yes, there is that polarization between West and East, whether it was people knowing Google versus Baidu, as well as even when you look at different economic zones that they are in the same economic basket, and that they have the shared challenges that they're trying to solve. And even their version of the internet will, to some extent, even be filtered down to their needs and their own realities versus one that's global. Okay. And this has been suggested as of last year, that that's what may be the direction.
Okay,
but
good,
I wouldn't
good.
say that that's one.
Good.
I have the answer.
Before I let you jump in on that, just another point, because Saeed has to work about the bigger architecture and the worries. There was an interesting survey out about 3 weeks ago, and we're in April now, so this is through the first quarter of 2019. In the United States alone, 6,000 major retailers shut down in the first quarter of 2019 because of the Amazon effect. So what you see in the United States first usually comes to the Middle East and Asia thereafter, right? Most of the time. So it's the hollowing out of Main Street America because of Amazon. So even my wife was saying she tried to do an Amazon detox. She lasted 5 days because of the convenience of being able to order your grocery store, food from Ocado in the UK, for example. Noon.com is here, Souk.com is here. The Amazon effect is everywhere, but it's moving so fast, to your point. The regulation's certainly not keeping pace, and people love the convenience, but it's got the downfall, which is going to, I think the automation is radical, and the job displacement will be radical, and this is why I think it's great, fantastic actually, that the UAE is saying the governments have got to get the architecture in place at the local level, but on the international level, to your point, to keep pace with it.
Just to mention for example, the establishment of the regulation laboratory on the UAE federal government level, where it allows entities, startups, to work with government, and what they do is they give them 6 months to work around the current legislation to test out the idea, whatever it may be, and if it works, they plug it into current legislation. So that's
Good.
one aspect.
Another question. She had her question from the field. Right?
Yes, we are now one question, and yeah.
Thank you so much for the mind-opening conversation. I only have 2 questions that I can ask, but I have 10 that I'm thinking about. One is, Tim Cook and Elon, a lot of people are having conversation about are jobs going to be, are there going to be less jobs in the future? But like the 10th grader that you were talking about from Shuifat, she sounds like a grown-up getting involved in this AI conversation. And so could it be possible that AI is widening the workforce and enabling youth to enter that, be it younger entrepreneurs or kids sharing creative content online, like music, stuff they write, and then monetizing that? You see so many kids right now who are blogging and making money from that. And so is it creating, could we have an optimistic look and say that it's creating jobs for people who weren't necessarily considered a part of the workforce?
Stop there for a second. We'll get to the second one because it's a complex question. Should hold on to the microphone. It's an interesting point because even my daughter, who's the 14-year-old's a kind of exercise fanatic, and she says, look, I follow some apps on fashion, some apps on workouts, and some apps on healthy eating and dietary concerns. But there's not one app that does them all. I want to create an app that bundles all of these together for women. So that's the point. There's jobs that are coming out of it. But you have is there a danger, Saeed, that there's to your point, I think, which is what you're suggesting, if you have the education and that skill set, you're fine. If not, you're going to be wiped out. Is that the reality?
That will be the reality, in my opinion. And I think what's interesting is, at least what we're seeing here in the UAE, is those that, for example, someone that watched 10,000 videos or 1,000 videos of programming has the ability to teach me and everyone how to code. So in terms of certification, so now if you do this other than well-developed economies, if I go here and I've watched X amount of videos and I can program, for example, the next Siri, it would be quite difficult for me to get a job, like a well sort of paying job that's stable in some sense. So even another question that we're asked, all right, this is happening, is there a way for me to certify that? That type of job, that type of experience, that type of even skill set. These guys have the skill set, but they haven't gone through the formal education system of K-12 and so on and so forth.
You have to be adaptable.
Yeah. So then a lot of. So to your question, yes, that is a reality that is currently happening, where we're seeing those. So I think. So there is a YouTuber who is, I think, became a millionaire, and they're 3-4 years old just from having a brand. They just had witty parents that just utilized that aspect.
Kylie Jenner is the first billionaire.
Exactly.
Incredible. Do we have any more time for questions?
We don't have more time, and our guests for the next session are already here. So I will invite those with burning questions definitely to join you guys in the back seats. But I will give the microphone to Asma to ask her question and to close. Thank you.
Thank you Mr. John. Thank you ولدي سعيد يعني ما قصرت وكانت المحاضرة جدا.
What a find, huh? What a find.
Yes, very
no,
fine.
but seriously, superb.
I said he's my son.
Yeah.
That's why Arab. And I feel proud of him, and of you, of course. يعني.
Yeah.
And what my question, because they said now with the technology, how I understand, يعني, with technology, they now for job. Many people, they lost their job because they said with the internet and this one, they can't do every job. And what is happening, what I found from another people, they have more hours to work. Instead, before there are 2 in the office or 3, now 1, he work for the 3 of them, but he go out from his office at 8 o'clock. Instead, when this you make comfortable for employee, at least he work 5 hours, and the rest of the time with his family, with his exercise, for health. But we will find this opposite.
He has more time, more in the job, more tiring, no communication, only with machine. In the end, where is the human? Where will go the human sense?
So what we're seeing, so there's a concept called WeWork. It's a company that reached, I think, over $1 billion valuation, where what they've done is, and this is something regarding well-being and the like, where the work becomes an aspect of, and I'll say it in Arabic, في نوع من الرفاهية. The workplace has a gym, they have a spa, they have I don't know what. So just
يعني في ناس حالهم على التقاعد، صار موظف واحد يؤدي 4 وظائف. أنا ما سويت شيء، ما حليت مشكلة، أنا صعبت المشكلة. أنا خليت واحد يشتغل عن 4 بس يرجع من شغله الساعة 8، ما عنده حياة خاصة.
هي لازم تنظري لها أنت من نقطتين.
أنا أتكلم من ناحية الهيومن سايد.
من الهيومن سايد. So what many different entities are doing, they're putting band-aids. All right, we'll do مثلا, we'll have yoga at the workplace, but they're not demanding, they're not trying to identify the challenges and the different issues that their employees facing.
We don't want him in the job. Finish 4 hours, go home.
Hey, what we're seeing, and then the other aspect is that from different levels, specifically in senior levels, there is this training of people being looked at as a balance sheet. At the end of the day, it all comes to numbers and numbers and the balance sheet. Is the number lower than last year? Okay, good. If it's not, then and ultimately this has been the way of startups, whether it was in the early industrial revolution and the like. So there needs to be a change in different aspects. One on the daily, let's say daily life or routine of that employee, where they feel that this is a relaxing environment that they can work in. And on the other end is people who are managing that environment understand that you cannot overwork a person so long, and they can only give you so much. At the end of the day, this is energy expenditure, and you can run out of energy as a result.
And I don't like to see the SNN and I see the report instead of Mr. John. Yani it's boring. It will be.
Don't
now
worry.
they replace. They say they will replace.
The last generation of human reporters, the ones that are 15 years behind me, that's the last generation, I think. Now, at the end of the day, though, you do need. This is what Tim Cook was saying. You do need the human mind for the human experience and the human analysis. And we shouldn't be lazy to let the machine take us over. That's the key here. But I say this genuinely. I'm really happy that UAE has woken up to the challenge of this. And I think the regulations for the workers that you're talking about are not in place, not just here, but internationally, because everybody's focused on the bottom line, right? And you have to bring in the human element. If the machines are coming in that strong, you have to say, what's the role of the human being? Otherwise, we won't have a role. You have to be able to raise a family with peace. That's
why we should have always the electricity, not switch off. That's why I'm afraid when you switch off, what we'll do.
Well, I have the final point because I know we have to finish. That when I liaise with the Europeans for an event that I'm chairing or for coverage, right? Many of the companies in France and Switzerland now, they switch off by law their email at 6 p.m.
Okay.
Some of them 5 p.m.
Good.
Yeah, you say it's good, but then I say, okay, why am I not getting an answer to my request? So we've been conditioned to work on the 9-9-6, right? This craziness, but it's a good idea.
2 days ago, we have a speaker here, Carl Ornay, stoka بسمونه مديح البطء, his book, In Praise of Slow, opposite this panels. It's a very nice book. You should read it, Mr.
Okay, my final point is, I tried to say no to Ms. Asma, because I was traveling to Saudi Arabia this week for a conference, and then our studio in Abu Dhabi is being rebuilt, so I worked out of Dubai instead. She says, I can't take no for an answer. So that's how we ended up on Saturday, and we really appreciate Saeed coming in. So thanks for the invitation. Yeah,
Thank you so much.